I've always despised being a weakling. When I was in elementary school, my delicacy only manifested itself during gym class. But now in high school, my whole disposition was to be feeble for my own good, and Blake Howard and his cronies reminded me that on a daily basis. To be fair, Blake's best buddy, Landon Fletcher, was my primary bully. But I always saw Blake as the face of their group because he was the meekest yet most attractive one. How could a bully be attractive? Wake up, Stephen Hayes. I was being delusional again. Watch where you're going, stick. Landon jeered as he purposely bumped into me during lunchtime. This caused my bowl of noodles to topple over, spilling onto the ground. I was up all night the day before writing a story for the school paper, so I was too sleep deprived to avoid their group at lunch today. Whenever I would encounter them, they would almost always push me off, which is why I tried to avoid them at all costs. Laughs reverberated after Landon's teasing remark, and I swiftly bent down to at least save my unopened pack of apple juice. Surprisingly, Blake Howard also bent down for a split second. I thought he was going to help me. Our eyes met, and I could not help but notice how fascinating his blue orbs were. I managed to reach out for the apple juice, and he quickly made a beeline for it too. But instead of grabbing the apple juice, he reached for my hand instead. He held onto it momentarily before Landon called out his name, and I could have sworn I saw a hint of guilt flash through Blake's eyes when he snatched the apple juice from my cold hands before walking off with his friends. I shook my head and lowered it in shame. Sooner or later, some of my friends helped me up and offered to get me a new tray of lunch. Throughout that meal, I could not help but feel Blake's piercing eyes upon me. Every now and then, I would glance over at their boisterous table, only to see him staring straight at me. When our eyes met, he would quickly look away and pretend to be preoccupied. Could Blake Howard possibly be feeling bad for what his clique did to me? Thankfully, I managed to avoid their notorious friend group throughout that week. Surprisingly, when I went to get my lunch the next day, the kind lunch lady asked me if I was Stephen Hayes, which I then confirmed. "Your lunch has been paid, dearest," said Susan, the cafeteria staff. I was perplexed. Who could have possibly treated me to lunch without my knowledge? Weirdly enough, the same occurrence took place for the rest of the week. Susan told me another student had paid for my lunch, but she promised to keep his name anonymous. In a world filled with aggression and misery, the act of kindness that the unknown sender had done for me made my entire week. The next week, I was in a cafeteria once more when I bumped into Blake Howard, sans his cronies. That was surprising. I thought they were inseparable. Astonishingly, I did not feel the need to flee upon seeing Blake. If this were Langdon, I would have bolted, lest he decides that I would be the butt of the joke that day. But Blake was mainly quiet and typically went along with his toxic friend's tomfoolery. As I neared the end of the lunch line, he quietly approached me and made a gesture as if he wanted to carry my tray for me. Our hands brushed in the process, and I was too stunned to say anything. By the time his hands were engulfing mine, as though wanting to take the tray from me, my mouth was slightly agape. What was he trying to do? Our eyes were locked, and I felt as though everyone else in the cafeteria faded into oblivion. However, Landon's obnoxious laughter snapped me out of my reverie. "Toss it, Blake, toss it!" Landon egged him. The former clearly wanted Blake to mess with my lunch yet again. Blake hesitated for a split second, and that was enough for me to break free from his grasp and run away. I heard laughter from their mean crew and mean comments being thrown at me, but I kept running. Was it truly the thought of getting bullied again that made me nervous? Or was it having Blake Howard's hands brushing with mine? I did not know. In an unexpected twist of fate, I had another similar interaction with Blake just a few days later. I was in the library, my sanctuary, and the one place I was guaranteed safety from the school bullies. That was why I was shocked to see Blake there, and more startlingly, why he sat next to me, unspeaking. We stayed that way for a while, and I was not going to lie, he made me nervous. I was nervous, not because I was expecting him to attack me or show aggression, but because I had always been admiring him from afar. His notorious image aside, he was probably the most attractive guy in school for me with his strapping build. Plus, I heard that, unlike his friends, he actually excelled in academics. I was startled when he suddenly reached for my pile of books and examined the book at the very top, Great Expectations. It was my favorite book, so I almost always had it with me, but my edition was torn and tattered. In a self-defense gesture, I always reached for that book, causing our hands to collide once again. There was something electric at that contact, like something in the air was different. He must have felt it too because he also looked up at me and our eyes met. However, he then withdrew his hands from the book, returning it to me. "You always carry this? Why?" he said in his hoarse voice. I would have been intimidated, but for some reason, I was not. Blake had a different aura to him compared to his cronies. Without Landon and his other friends that exuded toxicity and fragile masculinity, he actually seemed like someone I could be friends with. "It's my favorite book," I replied meekly before gathering my stuff and heading out, not wanting to be in his presence anymore. He made me blush profusely, and even without a glance at the mirror, I knew it. I could not risk feeling anything for my bully. The next day, I opened my locker and a small parcel came tumbling down. This was a common occurrence in my high school as the lockers were easily broken into and thus became either a medium of prank or a display of affection. In my case, I was certain that there was no secret admirer leaving me gifts, so I must have been the center of a prank. When I unwrapped the package, out appeared a pristine and premium copy of Great Expectations. It was evidently an expensive edition, and I was floored. Who could have possibly given me this? My mind immediately thought that it was from Blake. But why? Throughout the day, I kept trying to get some time alone with Blake, but to no avail. He was surrounded by Landon and the rest of his friends whenever I saw them. I could not possibly approach him with them as the audience. I would be a laughingstock. It seemed like luck was on my side as later that evening, after I snapped a selfie and posted on my Instagram story, the very person that was on my mind the entire day suddenly sent me a message. The notification read, "At Blake Howard 3, reply to your story." Cute. My heart started beating uncontrollably at this point. Could this be the confirmation that I had been seeking? Did Blake really send me a mystery gift and was now complimenting me? What alternate universe was this? Hesitantly, I thanked him and asked him what has gotten into him. To which he asked if he could call me. I did not even know he had my number. With much reservation, I agreed. "Hey," Blake whispered. His voice was unusually vulnerable. "Did you get my present this morning?" I gasped as my suspicions were confirmed. "And the lunch you received the other week? That was on me." "You mean lunches? Did you pay for an entire week's worth? That was you?" I questioned, unbelieving. He also confirmed this, and I was beyond shocked that he was capable of such gesture. Before I knew it, we had been talking for over an hour. It started with him merely prompting me about my interests and me, in turn, answering hesitantly. But slowly, I opened up to him and was also curious about him. I always thought that Blake was this intimidating and well-built guy, one of the most popular ones in school, but notorious for being affiliated with Landon and his group of bullies. But after exchanging words with him, I found out that he was a multifaceted individual with lots of common interests with me. Eventually, I had to end the long conversation and I still had homework to do. Blake seemed disappointed but nonetheless agreed. "Can I see you tomorrow in the library?" he stuttered. Never in the light of day did I ever think that I would witness him vulnerable and unsure like this. Although I was closed off from him at first, I swiftly became comfortable talking to him and I was actually looking forward to meeting him, so I agreed. Little did I know that that night would mark the start of an illicit affair. We mainly studied in the library, which was guaranteed free from Landon's wrath, but we did not interact much at first. I suppose both of us felt weirded out by the fact that the two of us, with contrasting personalities and distinct outlooks, were together. Despite our initial silence as we studied in the library together, I found comfort in Blake's presence. We did not speak much, but I appreciated his warmth nonetheless. His touch would at times linger on my hands or my arms absent-mindedly. I also started to reach out for his hands to give it a gentle squeeze when I felt like he was struggling with his assignment. While we were not showy in public, because we could not risk being found out by Landon, we were more of ourselves when we hung out at my house after school. Gone were the days that Blake would spend afternoons playing billiards with his friends and drinking away. Instead, he started dedicating his afternoons and evenings to me. We would spend the rest of the day reading side by side on the benches in our backyard or watching Netflix on the living room couch. I even felt braver and started initiating cuddles, which Blake readily accepted. You know, I've never done that with anyone, he confessed as I snuggled up closer against him and he buried his nose in my hair. Done what? Cuddle? I giggled. He nodded and started drawing patterns on my arms. Only you, he whispered. Although after weeks of dating, I was still struggling to understand him because of our differences. It was times like this when he was most vulnerable that my feelings for him grew. He was a highly misunderstood guy and I felt for him. Beneath his exterior, he had so much to offer and I could not be more honored that I get to uncover him layer by layer. One afternoon while we were in the backyard, I called him out for his blatant staring that was honestly distracting me as I worked on my algebra homework. You're staring again, Blake, I said gently. He snapped out of his reverie and facepalmed. I'm doing it again. Damn, I'm sorry, he replied. You're so at peace it comforts me. I shook my head at how different our personalities were. While he was upright and blatant, I was more reserved and timid. But somehow, despite being yin and yang, sun and moon, we worked. I flashed him a loving grin, then which seemed to be infectious because he also started smiling uncontrollably. You know what that smile does to me? He commented. You drive me crazy, Steven. With that, we shared an electric kiss. I wish I could relive that moment because it also happened to be my very first kiss. It was magical and everything I hoped it would be. A few days after that, Blake was over again as we were reviewing for our literature test together. He got up to refill his water bottle in my kitchen and shortly after, I followed him only to see him talking to my mom. They were not alerted of my presence and I almost spoke out loud until I realized that they were talking. Thank you, Blake. Really, you bring up the best in Steven, my mom said as he patted Blake's back and the latter smiled at his revelation. Thank you for making our boy happy. He brings out the best in me, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. If anything, I should be the one thanking the both of you for Steven's existence, Blake complimented. I realized then that my father was also in the kitchen, showing gratitude towards Blake. I think it's mutual, son. I could not be happier that I did not judge you too quickly. You are a good man, and I trust that you'll always take care of my boy, said my dad. All of my life, my parents have been supportive of my sexuality. They never tried to convert me into someone I was not and wholeheartedly embraced me when I came out. Nothing could make me happier than seeing them also accept someone who had been an integral part of my life recently and had shown me what love was. They embraced Blake and saw him for the good man that he really was, and that meant so much to me. That night, Blake and I were finally headstrong about sealing our relationship. I guess he shared my sentiment of being exhausted from hiding who we truly were. We were ready to make our budding romance known, regardless of what anyone said. Your parents have accepted me and forgiven me for the bully that I was, he said. I think we should stop hiding. For the record, you were not really a bully. You were simply misled and had toxic company, I reassured him. He pulled me closer, kissing my forehead gently. I don't know what I ever did to deserve your love and understanding, but I promise to protect you until the end of time. The next day, we walked into the school hallways hand in hand. There were whispers and gasps that followed us initially, but one glare from Blake and the onlookers dispersed. He had that kind of effect on people because although he was technically not as violent and not as much of a bully as his friends, he still had a frightening physique and an intimidating gaze that could make you pee your pants. Chill, babe, I laughed. They have no business looking at us like that, he affirmed. But of course, the worst was yet to come. Out of nowhere, Landon emerged with his cronies following him behind shortly. He wore a smug look on his face, smirking as though he wanted trouble. And of course, Landon always wanted trouble. At the sight of the troublemakers, Blake tightened his grip on my hands as if to tell me that he would not be going anywhere. He was here to protect me and nothing else. No one else mattered. Oh look, if it isn't our ex-friend / Middleton High's newest gay, Landon taunted. He earned a few sniggers from his clique. I can't believe I ever befriended you, Blake Howard. You disgust me beyond words. I bet you even liked being in our group because of all the men you were around, continued Langdon while the rest of the group simply eyed us. And of all men in the school, you choose this weakling? But of course, you choose someone at your level, and you both make me sick. Upon hearing the insults Landon made about me, Blake did not hesitate to throw a punch which the former returned. I held Blake back at this point while the rest of the friends restrained Landon. "Don't you ever utter a word about Stephen. You have no idea who he is," Blake defended. My stomach fluttered at his words. Even at times that Landon was coming at him, he did not mind. But as soon as Landon hurled insults toward me, it was over. Unfortunately, some teachers witnessed the commotion and brought it to the attention of the principal, who quickly acted on the matter, calling me, Blake, and Landon to his office. Mr. Lynch was a tanned, elderly man who had a receding hairline and face blotched with wrinkles. He was eyeing the three of us, waiting for an explanation. It was Blake who eventually mustered up the courage to explain why the both of them were sporting bruises on their faces, with Landon even flaunting a bloody nose. "I threw the first punch, sir," admitted Blake. "Damn right. Now can I go? He should be punished, throwing the stick as part of the community service for his involvement too," Landon suggested, clearly referring to me as stick because of my reputation as a weakling. "But not without being provoked, sir, about my sexuality nonetheless, as well as that of my partner," Blake added. "Explain, Mr. Howard," replied Mr. Lynch sternly. "I am gay, sir. I am in a relationship with Mr. Stephen Hayes here, and I have recently just come out. Landon, being an old friend of mine, was unhappy about this and started throwing insults at us," explained Blake. "I am not friends with a gay person. How dare you?" defended Landon. With this, Mr. Lynch eyed Landon. "Well, I do not condone violence, which was wrong on your part, Mr. Howard. I mostly despise discrimination more. As a father of a gay man, I am also ashamed that a student here in Middleton High is prejudiced against two fellow students merely because of their sexuality. They are not hurting you with their love, son. Why are you so full of hate?" he asked Landon rhetorically. After Lynch reprimanded Landon, giving him an earful, he then sanctioned both Blake and Landon. Although Mr. Lynch was very much supportive of gay rights and encouraged everyone to be themselves, he did not agree with Blake throwing a punch, so he also gave him community service hours to compensate. After we left the office, eagerly to get away from Landon, we spotted Blake's group of friends who looked at him apologetically as they spotted us. Blake gave them a small smile but did not engage in conversation anymore. Hand in hand, we were walking down the hallway when Landon struck yet again. "You sick gay fucks! You should be banned from here! You are a walking disease!" yelled Landon. "That's quite enough, Landon," one of their friends finally snapped. The other nodded in agreement, condoning Landon's incessant insult towards us. "All this time we've stuck by you, and this has been the lowest you've ever gone. And if you can't treat Blake like that, what makes us think you won't do the same to us?" said another friend. "Have a good life, Landon. We're done being your puppets," another one yelled before they also left Landon in unison. Blake simply shrugged his shoulders and grabbed my hand. "I'm glad you're out of that mess. That group of bullies has self-destructed after all," I commented as I gave his hand a squeeze. "I cannot be happier I'm out of their lives and into yours. The only thing that my group of ex-friends and former bullies have done well for me is that they brought me to you." The end. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome. Stephen Hayes has always been dubbed as the weakling, which made him vulnerable to the school bully, Landon Fletcher, and his cronies. In an unexpected twist of fate, one of Landon Fletcher's friends, the ever muscular and attractive Blake Howard, takes an interest in Stephen. It seemed like every time Landon's group of bullies want to mess with Stephen, Blake becomes the middleman. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Blake had been getting in the way so that he could steal a touch from him. Turns out that Blake Howard was not the bully that everyone thought he was. In fact, he started to develop feelings for Stephen when they spent time together in the library and over at Stephen's house. As the romance starts to bud, the parents of Stephen are overjoyed that someone was finally making their son happy. The parents extend their acceptance to Blake, and finally, Stephen and Blake felt comfortable enough to come out to the world. As they revealed their relationship, the student body was shocked. But one intimidating glance by Blake and the gossips die at once. Landon was not letting them off so easily though, and provokes Blake into a fight which led them to the principal's office. Mr. Lynch, the Middleton Principal, did not encourage Blake's violence, but deeply condoned Landon's prejudice against gay men as he always had a gay son. Meanwhile, the old friend group of bullies finally stands up against Landon, tired of his bossing around and his hurtful words. Finally, Landon no longer had his group of bullies, and Stephen and Blake continued their happy romance.